They chained Apache woman to a wagon and dragged her, until a quiet rancher steps into them. The sun had barely risen over the wide plains, spilling golden light over the dusty earth. The wind whispered across the dry grass, carrying with it the scent of distant forests and the faint smoke of morning fires. In the middle of this quiet landscape, a small group moved carefully, their figures low against the horizon. Among them was an Apache woman, walking with the rhythm of someone used to life in the open land, alert to every sound, every movement. Her name was not widely known outside her people, but among those who traveled with her, she was respected for her wisdom, her calm strength, and the gentle courage she carried like a shield. She moved slowly, not out of fear but out of caution. The world outside her people's lands was unpredictable, and humans, she had learned, could be as dangerous as the wild animals that roamed the plains. Her children and companions followed her closely, their trust in her complete. They walked together, sharing glances, small smiles, and quiet words that carried through the still morning air. It was the kind of calm that could only exist in fleeting moments before life shifted in an instant. And shift it did. From the edge of the distant tree line, figures appeared, moving quickly and without warning. They came on horseback, rough shapes against the soft light of dawn, and their intentions were clear in the way they urged their horses forward. The woman saw them before they reached her, the flicker of movement in the corner of her eye, the distant echo of hooves growing louder. A cold dread settled in her chest. She knew this kind of approach. She had heard of others captured, punished, or harmed simply for being who they were. The first men were upon them in moments. Shouts rang out, harsh and commanding, as the group of attackers surrounded them. Panic spread among the smaller members of the group. The children began to cry, their small voices piercing the air like high, sharp notes, but the woman stayed still. Her mind worked faster than her heart could beat. She tried to push herself forward, to protect those with her, but the men were fast, their grips strong, their chains cold and unyielding. Before she could fully react, a chain was thrown over her shoulders. It bit into her skin, biting and cold, and she felt the sharp tug as it connected to the wooden wagon that had been brought for this cruel purpose. Her legs struggled against the sudden weight, but it was useless. The men laughed, their voices filled with a strange mixture of triumph and cruelty. They began to drag her, slowly at first, over the rough, uneven ground. Each step sent jolts of pain through her body, bruising her arms and legs, scraping her skin against the coarse dirt. Despite the fear, the woman did not scream. She gritted her teeth and kept her eyes on her companions, on the children, trying to communicate without words that they should stay back, that they should not make the men angrier. She knew that any sudden move could make the situation worse. She drew strength from the memories of her family, her people, the land she had walked since childhood, the stories told by her elders of courage and survival. The men dragged her across the rough terrain. Dust rose in clouds around her, stinging her eyes and filling her lungs. Her clothes were torn, her hair caught on the rough edges of the wagon and the chains, but she held her composure. The woman's mind raced with thoughts of escape, of resistance, but also of strategy. She needed to survive, to protect the others, to endure until help could arrive. She remembered the ways of her people, the quiet strength that had carried them through countless hardships, the patience that was sometimes more powerful than force. People from nearby homesteads began to notice. From a distance, some watched in horror, some whispered to each other in fear. A few dared to step closer, but none intervened. The men's power was obvious. They were armed, confident, and cruel. Their faces showed no sign of empathy, only a harsh satisfaction in the act they were committing. The woman's heart sank with each step, each jolt, each scream of the chains against the earth. Yet even in that moment, she refused to let fear conquer her entirely. She focused on breathing, on enduring, on surviving. The children huddled together, their small hands clutching each other, their eyes wide with disbelief. The woman tried to speak to them, her voice low, steady, a quiet anchor amid the chaos. "Stay strong," she whispered, though the wind carried her words weakly to their ears. "Stay together. Do not run. Do not fight." Wait. She knew it was little comfort, but it was all she could offer. The journey across the plains seemed endless. Every rock, every rise in the land became a new obstacle. The chains rattled, dragging her across the unforgiving earth, leaving small cuts and bruises in their wake. Her muscles screamed in protest, but her mind remained alert, scanning the horizon for any sign of help, any chance for intervention. In that vast, empty landscape, hope seemed distant, yet she refused to let it vanish entirely. She noticed the subtle shift in the air, the sound of hooves that did not belong to her attackers, the soft rustle of someone moving deliberately, quietly toward them. Her heart leapt with a cautious hope. Could it be help? Could someone brave enough to confront these men exist in such a quiet, fearful town? The thought energized her, giving her a small measure of strength to endure the ongoing ordeal. The dragging continued for what felt like hours, though in reality it was only minutes, stretched endlessly by fear and pain. Each jolt, each scrape, each sharp tug of the chain was a reminder of the cruelty she faced. Yet she endured, silently, with a resolve that seemed almost unnatural in its steadiness. Her eyes, bright and unyielding, never left the horizon, searching for even the smallest sign of rescue. In that moment, the woman became more than herself. She became a symbol of resilience, of courage in the face of overwhelming force, a quiet but powerful figure against the tide of cruelty. Her endurance was not loud, not filled with shouts or defiance, but it was real, undeniable, and profound. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was a testament to the strength of those who refused to surrender, even when the world seems determined to crush them. And far off in the distance a figure began to move, slow, deliberate, quiet. Not a shout, not a rush, just steady steps toward the chaos. The woman's eyes, filled with pain but also cautious hope, focused on that figure. Something in him, something in the way he approached, spoke of courage, of integrity, of the possibility that not everyone would stand by while cruelty unfolded. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the plains. Dust swirled in the wind, covering the land in a haze. The woman, chained and dragged, endured. She endured for her family, for her people, for herself. And in the distance a quiet presence grew closer, ready to challenge the injustice she had been subjected to. In that moment it was clear that the story was far from over. What began as an act of unimaginable cruelty had set the stage for a confrontation that would test courage, morality, and the strength of one human being to protect another. The woman, chained and hurt, was still alive, still fighting in her own quiet, unwavering way. And soon that fight would meet another. A quiet rancher who, despite the fear around him, would step into a moment that demanded bravery. The plains were silent again, save for the sound of chains, the heavy breathing of the woman, and the soft whispers of the wind. But the silence carried a promise. Even in the darkest moments, courage could appear, quietly and unexpectedly, to turn the tide. The sun climbed higher, painting the plains with a harsh light that made the dust swirl like tiny golden clouds. The Apache woman was still chained to the wagon, dragged across the rough earth, her body aching from the sudden shocks and jolts of the uneven ground. Her clothes were torn and dusty, her skin scraped and bruised, but her spirit remained unbroken. Each breath she drew was sharp and deliberate, a reminder to herself that she had endured worse before, and could endure this as well. The men who had captured her seemed to grow bolder with every step. Their laughter, rough and loud, echoed across the open plains. They shouted at her, mocking her strength, trying to break her will, but she refused to respond. She knew that any reaction might only provoke them further. Her mind worked faster than her body could move, planning, hoping, calculating, always thinking of her family, her children, and how to survive. At a distance, a few townspeople had gathered. They watched from behind fences, from the doorways of small houses, or hiding in the shadows of barns. Their eyes were wide with shock, some frozen in fear, others whispering to each other. "We should do something," one man muttered. But most did nothing. Fear gripped them tightly. They could not imagine standing up to the cruel men who had taken control. The woman noticed the quiet observers, the people who had the chance to intervene, and she silently sent them a message with her eyes: "Stay calm, do not act recklessly, and wait for the right moment. The wagon jolted violently over a rock, sending a sharp pain through her arms and back. She gritted her teeth, letting out a silent cry as she held onto herself, keeping her mind sharp. Each jolt reminded her of the cruelty of those who had done this, of how people could hurt others simply because they could. But at the same time, she drew strength from her memories. Memories of her people's lands, of her family's courage, of the elders' stories about survival and resilience. She reminded herself that she had faced hard times before, and that this was only another challenge to endure. The children, too, were frightened. They huddled together, whispering to each other in small voices, their eyes never leaving the chained woman. She could see their fear, feel it in the way they clung to each other, in the trembling of their small hands. And yet she remained calm for their sake, knowing that her courage could give them hope. She whispered quietly to them when she could, using low tones and gestures. "Stay strong. Don't panic. We will survive this." Even if they could not understand fully, her determination sent a quiet signal. Fear could be faced even in moments of extreme danger. Meanwhile, the men dragging the wagon grew careless. Their confidence made them overstep, their laughter ringing too loudly across the plains. They were unaware of the approaching figure, someone moving steadily, silently, from the distance. The Apache woman's eyes, sharp and alert despite her exhaustion, caught the movement. A sense of hope, cautious and fragile, touched her heart. She had survived many dangers before, and now, perhaps, there was a chance for rescue. Time seemed to stretch. Each second dragged on, the sun climbing ever higher, casting long shadows across the land. The wagon's wooden wheels groaned, scraping against rocks and roots, leaving deep marks in the dirt. Her hands, though bruised and raw from the chains, gripped them tightly, trying to control her body, trying to avoid further injury. Her mind, however, did not stop. She thought of what might happen if the men continued unchecked, of how she could endure, and of how someone might arrive to save her. From the distance, a dog barked sharply, echoing across the plains. The sound made the men glance around, momentarily distracted. Their laughter faltered, and the woman sensed the moment. Her eyes, bright with alertness, scanned the horizon for any sign of help. The barking repeated, now joined by other sounds, soft, deliberate steps on the dry earth, the rustle of movement that was different from the wind. The townspeople, still watching, felt a ripple of fear and hope. They whispered among themselves, recognizing that someone was coming, yet fear held them back. Could they trust that a single person could face the cruel men without being harmed? The uncertainty weighed heavily on them. Some clenched their fists, wishing they had the courage to step forward but remain behind their fences, watching in silence. The Apache woman's focus never wavered. She had endured long journeys, harsh winters, and moments of danger far from safety, but nothing compared to this sudden cruelty. The physical pain was sharp, but the mental strain was even heavier. She reminded herself to breathe slowly, to hold on to her strength, to endure each moment. Her mind recalled the stories of her people, of warriors who had faced impossible odds and survived, of mothers who had protected their children with quiet determination. These memories became her anchor, her shield against despair. The men dragging the wagon began to argue among themselves. Their voices, loud and angry, momentarily distracted them from the task. The woman noticed this and silently calculated. The brief moments of distraction could be a chance for intervention, for someone to step forward and stop the cruelty. She hoped silently that the figure she had noticed moving closer would take advantage of this weakness. As the wagon continued over the rough ground, the chains rattled in a harsh rhythm, echoing across the plains. The woman's body ached, but she focused on her breathing and on maintaining her mental strength. Every time the wagon hit a rock or a root, she felt a jolt that made her wince, but she refused to cry out. Her silence became a quiet defiance, a way of showing that despite the physical pain, her spirit remained unbroken. At last, the figure on the horizon drew closer. It was a man, walking steadily, without rush, his movements careful and deliberate. He was tall and strong, but there was a calmness about him, a quiet authority that seemed to belong to the land itself. The Apache woman's eyes met his for a brief moment, and in that glance a silent understanding passed. Perhaps help had arrived. Perhaps his quiet man could stop the cruelty. The attackers had not noticed him yet. They were still focused on their task, their arrogance blinding them to the approaching presence. The woman's heart lifted slightly, her hope growing stronger. She clung to the thought that someone brave and determined could intervene, and that courage could arrive even in the midst of fear and cruelty. The children continued to watch, their small bodies trembling, their eyes wide with hope and fear. The woman whispered softly, though the wind carried her words poorly, "Hold on. Stay together. Help is coming." Even if the words were faint, they carried a strength born of her calm determination. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of the approaching man to the attackers. They finally noticed him, and their confident expressions changed slightly, replaced by curiosity and unease. The woman felt a small surge of hope. The balance was shifting. Perhaps the cruelty would end soon, and someone would step forward to protect her from the injustice. The townspeople watched, holding their breath. Some felt fear, some hope, some a mix of both. The quiet man was approaching steadily, his calm presence contrasting sharply with the chaotic scene of the chained woman and the men dragging her. Every step he took seemed measured, deliberate, and filled with a silent courage that spoke louder than any shout could. The sun shone brightly over the plains, casting long shadows and highlighting the tension in every figure present. The woman's body ached, her skin bruised, her spirit tested, but she had endured this far. She understood that the next moments could change everything. If the man succeeded, she would be free. If he failed, the cruelty might continue. Yet she refused to give in to despair. She had survived this far, and she would survive the next moments too, with patience, endurance, and hope. The first signs of confrontation began to appear. The attackers slowed slightly, their confidence shaken by the man's calm approach. The woman felt a flicker of relief, knowing that courage could sometimes defeat cruelty even before words were spoken. She watched him carefully, silently grateful that he had arrived in time. The children continued to huddle together, whispering softly to each other. They clung to the hope that had begun to grow in the air, and the woman smiled faintly at them, despite her pain. They were not yet safe, but the presence of the quiet man brought a promise of protection, a reminder that courage could appear even in the most unexpected moments. As the wagon continued to move slowly across the plains, the tension grew. The woman's body ached, her bruises deepened, and the dust coated her skin. But her spirit remained strong. She drew strength from the approaching figure, from the hope in the children's eyes, and from the quiet determination that had carried her this far. The moment was approaching when courage and cruelty would meet face to face. The woman, chained and weary, remained calm. She had endured long before this, and she would endure now. The plains stretched endlessly around her, yet the quiet presence of the approaching man promised that help was near. In that vast, dusty landscape, hope began to shine. A quiet man, determined and brave, was walking steadily toward an injustice that demanded courage. The Apache woman, still chained and dragged across the rough earth, clung to the thought that help had arrived, that perhaps this cruelty would end, and that endurance and courage could change everything. The quiet rancher walked steadily across the sun-baked plains, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. He had seen many things in his life, and cruelty was one he could never ignore. The sight that had reached him that morning, a woman chained to a wagon dragged across the rough land, stirred a quiet but firm anger in his heart. He was not a man who shouted or sought confrontation for glory. His strength was in his calm, measured approach, and today he knew it was needed more than ever. As he drew closer, the woman's figure came into sharper view. Her body was bruised and scraped, her clothes torn and covered in dust, yet her posture, despite everything, was unbroken. Her eyes, alert and fierce, met his briefly, and he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He knew that if he did not act, she would continue to suffer. And so, with careful determination, he adjusted his pace, ensuring his approach would not startle the men dragging her, but would signal that help had arrived. The attackers were still caught up in their own arrogance. They laughed and shouted, unaware of the quiet figure moving closer with calm authority. One of them nudged the wagon forward roughly, making the woman cry out quietly in pain as the chains dug into her arms. The rancher's jaw tightened. He could feel the tension in the air, a dangerous combination of cruelty and arrogance that could erupt at any moment. He slowed his pace slightly, assessing the situation, planning the best way to intervene without causing immediate violence. His eyes scanned the men carefully. They were strong-armed and confident, but there was hesitation hidden beneath their bravado. They were used to fear controlling others, but this man before them radiated calm. They had no way to know if he was alone or if he had the strength to challenge them. Yet the stillness in his movements made them uneasy. It was a quiet power, the kind that comes not from shouts or threats, but from inner confidence and courage. The Apache woman's eyes never left him. She had endured the pain of the chains, the rough ground, the relentless dragging. But now there was something new, a chance for intervention, a hope that someone could end this nightmare. Her body ached, but her spirit lifted slightly. She focused on steadying her breathing, keeping calm for herself and for the children, who huddled in fear just a few steps behind. The rancher moved closer still, each step deliberate. He stopped at a safe distance from the attackers, standing tall, his posture firm. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm but firm, carrying across the plain with surprising clarity. "Stop this now," he said. There was no shout, no threat of violence in his tone, only authority and an unshakable insistence. The words themselves seemed to cut through the tension in the air, slowing the men's movements and forcing them to pause. The attackers turned toward him, surprise flashing across their faces. No one had spoken to them in that way, and certainly no one had dared approach them quietly, yet confidently. They looked at each other, uncertain, then back at him. One of the men laughed nervously, trying to hide his unease. "Who are you to tell us what to do?" he barked. But even as he spoke, his voice lacked conviction, and he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The rancher's gaze did not waver. He did not step closer immediately. He waited, giving the men the choice to stop before action became necessary. His calmness was disarming, and the woman, still chained, felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this man could succeed where others would fail, not with anger, but with steady, resolute courage. The woman's mind raced with thoughts of survival. She had faced cruel men before, but never so boldly, and never had someone intervened so quietly, yet so decisively. She felt a deep gratitude toward the rancher, but she also remained alert. The men were unpredictable, and their anger could erupt at any moment. She knew she had to continue focusing on staying calm, keeping her breathing steady, and enduring until help fully arrived. The attackers began to argue among themselves, their confidence shaken by the rancher's presence. Their voices rose in panic and confusion. One of them grabbed the chains roughly, jerking the woman violently. She cried out softly, feeling the sting of the chains on her arms. The rancher's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not move forward yet, but his calm authority grew more palpable. He was ready to intervene physically if needed, but he hoped the men would recognize the strength in his quiet presence and release her without violence. The tension was thick in the air, almost visible as it stretched across the plain. The townspeople who had been watching from a distance now whispered among themselves. Some clutched each other, some took small steps forward, emboldened by the rancher's bravery, yet none dared approach too closely. The woman, despite her pain, felt the hope spreading subtly, not just in herself but in those who watched. Courage could inspire courage, even in moments of fear. The rancher finally took a deliberate step closer, his eyes locked on the men dragging the wagon. He did not shout, he did not gesture wildly, he simply moved with purpose. "Let her go," he said again, more firmly this time. There was no threat, only insistence. One of the attackers stepped back, uncertainty flickering across his face. The others glanced at each other, confused by the unexpected confrontation. No one had taught them how to deal with a quiet, calm person who refused to back down. The woman could feel the chains loosen slightly as the men hesitated. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from hope. Perhaps her suffering would end soon. She drew on her inner strength, steadying her body, preparing for the moment when she could finally be free. Every ounce of her being focused on endurance, patience, and readiness. She had endured pain before, and she would endure until freedom came. The rancher's presence grew even more commanding without a word. He did not threaten with weapons. He did not shout. He simply stood firm, a human wall of calm and resolve. The attackers shifted nervously. Their confidence was crumbling in the face of someone who did not react to their cruelty with fear or anger, but with steady authority. One of the men, braver or perhaps more reckless than the others, stepped forward. He clenched his fists, trying to regain control. "We said she stays!" he shouted, but his voice trembled slightly. The rancher did not flinch. He met the man's gaze evenly, unbroken, and said simply, "I said stop." The calmness of the words struck harder than any shout, and for a moment the attacker froze. The woman felt a glimmer of hope she had not dared to feel in the past hour. She could see that courage, even quiet courage, could challenge cruelty and force a change. She tried to prepare herself for the moment when the chains would be removed, imagining the feel of the cold metal coming away from her skin, imagining the relief and freedom that was just within reach. The attackers argued among themselves again, unsure what to do. The rancher's calm authority seemed to grow in their eyes, making them hesitate even more. It was clear that they had underestimated him, and now their fear began to replace the arrogance that had guided them until this moment. The woman watched closely, knowing that she must remain still, silent, and alert. Her survival depended on it. The townspeople who had been observing now began to whisper encouragement to each other. "Maybe he'll save her," one said. "He looks so steady, I think he can stop them." The hope in their voices spread subtly, a reminder that courage could inspire not just one life, but many. The woman's muscles ached, her skin bruised and raw, yet her spirit remained strong. She had endured long journeys, harsh winters, and dangerous encounters before, but now she realized that courage could come from unexpected sources. The quiet rancher had stepped into a moment of cruelty and stood firm, challenging injustice with nothing but presence and determination. As the sun climbed higher, the standoff continued. The rancher's calm, unwavering stance began to shift the balance. The attackers were no longer certain of themselves. Their confidence faltered. The woman felt a small surge of strength, drawn from the silent courage that stood between her and continued suffering. Every moment that passed, she felt closer to freedom. The children watched from behind a safe distance, clinging to each other, their eyes wide. The woman whispered quietly to them, though the words were faint over the wind. "Stay calm. We are almost safe." Even in her pain, she remembered to provide comfort, a reminder that endurance and hope could be contagious, spreading quietly to others even in the midst of fear. The standoff continued, but the tides had begun to shift. The rancher's quiet bravery, his calm determination, and his refusal to allow cruelty to continue without consequence were changing the situation. The woman clung to the hope this brought, preparing herself for the moment when she would finally be released from the chains. The plains stretched endlessly, dust rising from the ground as the men moved uneasily. The rancher did not step back, did not falter, and did not speak more than necessary. His quiet courage radiated outward, touching the hearts of those who watched, giving hope to the woman, and shaking the confidence of those who had committed the act of cruelty. In that moment it became clear that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, steadily, and with patience. And when it does, even the cruelest acts can be challenged, and lives can be changed forever. The tension on the plains was almost unbearable. The sun was high now, casting harsh light over the dry, dusty landscape. The wagon wheels creaked with every movement, and the Apache woman, still chained, felt the raw sting of her arms and legs. But she had endured so much already, and her spirit, though weary, had not broken. Her eyes stayed fixed on the quiet rancher, standing tall, unshaken, and calm as he faced the men who had dragged her across the land. The rancher did not rush. He knew that in moments like this, haste could be dangerous. He measured every step, every word, understanding that the smallest gesture could escalate the situation or diffuse it. His presence alone had caused the attackers to hesitate, but now it was time to act with careful authority. He raised his voice, calm but firm, carrying across the wind-swept plains. "I said release her, now." The men looked at each other, confusion and doubt flickering in their eyes. Their arrogance had been replaced by uncertainty. They had expected submission, fear, or even silence, and instead they faced a man whose quiet strength seemed to challenge them without aggression. One of the men, bolder or perhaps more foolish than the others, stepped closer, trying to regain control. "Or what?" he sneered. His voice was meant to intimidate, but it lacked conviction, and the rancher did not flinch. The Apache woman's heart pounded, her muscles tense from the chains, yet she held herself steady. She knew that the outcome of this moment depended not on shouting or struggling, but on patience and endurance. Every eye on the plain seemed to be drawn to the rancher, and she felt a cautious hope rising in her chest. Perhaps this quiet man could stop them, not with force, but with his calm determination. The rancher's eyes met those of the man who had stepped forward. There was no anger in his gaze, no threat of violence, only a firm insistence that the act of cruelty stop immediately. "Let her go," he repeated, his voice steady, carrying a weight that made the man hesitate. The wind carried his words clearly, and for a moment, the plain seemed to hold its breath. The attackers exchanged nervous glances. Their confidence was crumbling. They had relied on fear and force to control the woman, and now that control was slipping. The rancher did not need to fight to make them pause. His quiet authority, his unshakable stance was enough to shake them. The woman felt a spark of hope. She drew on her own inner strength, preparing for the moment when freedom would come. The man who had tried to intimidate the rancher now stepped back, uncertainty in his movements. His companions looked at him for guidance, but none of them knew what to do. They had never faced someone like this, someone who did not respond to cruelty with fear or anger, someone who could hold his ground without raising his voice or weapons. The rancher's calm presence had turned the tide without a single act of violence. The woman's children watched from a safe distance, their small bodies trembling. She whispered softly to them, though the wind carried her words weakly. "Stay calm. Courage can protect us. Hold on to hope." She wanted them to see that bravery did not always roar. Sometimes it arrived quietly, steadily, and made a difference. The rancher took another measured step forward. "I will not ask again," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Release her, or you will face the consequences." The word consequences carried more weight than any weapon. The attackers could sense that he meant what he said, that he had the courage and skill to back up his words if needed. For the first time, fear flickered in their eyes. The Apache woman felt the chains bite into her skin as the men shifted uneasily. She had been dragged across the rough earth for what felt like an eternity, yet now hope pulsed in her veins. She focused on her breathing, steadying herself, preparing for the moment when she would finally be free. Every ounce of her endurance, every memory of survival and courage, strengthened her resolve. One of the men muttered under his breath, unsure of what to do. The others hesitated, sensing the growing power in the rancher's calm presence. Their arrogance was fading, replaced by doubt and fear. They had thought this would be an easy act, a display of control, but now everything had changed. One wrong move could lead to humiliation, defeat, or worse. The rancher did not raise his voice or threaten with weapons. He relied entirely on his presence, his steady stance, and his quiet authority. He knew that fear alone could be enough to make the attackers reconsider. He moved slightly to the side, positioning himself between the men and the woman, making it clear that any attempt to continue their cruelty would meet immediate resistance. The tension on the plain grew thicker, almost tangible. The sun beat down, the dust swirled, and the sounds of the wagon wheels and chains echoed sharply. The woman's muscles were exhausted, her body aching, but her eyes remained bright. She had endured far worse, and now courage stood in front of her, offering the possibility of safety. The attackers argued among themselves, their voices rising in frustration and fear. The woman noticed the uncertainty in their movements, the way their hands fidgeted, the way they glanced at the rancher without understanding his calm authority. They were unprepared for someone who did not react to cruelty with fear, and that unpreparedness was shifting the balance of power. The rancher took another deliberate step forward, closer now, standing firmly between the woman and her captors. He did not threaten with fists or weapons, but his eyes and stance communicated everything. He was ready, he was strong, and he would not allow this act to continue. The attackers, sensing the seriousness of the situation, faltered. The woman's hope grew stronger. She focused on the sound of the rancher's voice, calm and unwavering, and the determination in his eyes. Every moment brought them closer to freedom. Her children, watching from behind, began to hold their breath, sensing that courage could indeed protect them. The rancher spoke again, slowly and clearly. "Release her. This ends now." His voice carried across the plain with authority, and the attackers hesitated, caught between their pride and the realization that they were outmatched by quiet courage. Finally, after tense moments that felt like hours, one of the men reached forward to release the chains. The wagon jolted slightly as the woman's weight shifted, but she remained steady, focusing on her balance and her breathing. The chains clinked softly as they fell away from her wrists, and she felt a wave of relief wash over her body still aching but her spirit lifted. The rancher remained in place, watching carefully as the men backed away, their confidence broken. They muttered among themselves, unsure of what to do, and then slowly retreated, leaving the woman and her family standing free on the sunlit plain. The children ran to her side, their small hands clutching hers, their eyes wide with relief and awe. The woman knelt briefly, touching the ground beneath her, and then stood tall, still shaken but unbroken. She looked at the rancher, gratitude shining in her eyes. He nodded slightly, acknowledging her strength and resilience, but saying nothing. Words were not needed. The act itself had spoken louder than anything could. The townspeople, who had been watching from a distance, now began to emerge, murmuring among themselves about what they had just witnessed. Some stepped closer, offering help or support, inspired by the quiet courage that had stopped an act of cruelty and restored justice. The plains, once tense and filled with fear, now held a sense of calm, relief, and reflection. The woman, though exhausted and battered, knew that this moment marked a turning point. She had endured unimaginable fear and pain, but she had survived. She had witnessed the power of quiet courage, and she knew that even in moments of danger, hope could arrive in the form of a single determined person willing to stand for what was right. The rancher guided her and her family to a safer spot, away from the wagons and the dust of the struggle. He did not speak much, but his actions communicated care and protection. The woman helped her children recover their composure, whispering words of comfort and strength. The plains were still and bright, and for the first time that day she allowed herself to breathe fully, to feel the warmth of freedom returning to her body and soul. The attackers had gone, their arrogance replaced by caution, their cruelty halted by one quiet man who had refused to back down. The woman looked at the rancher again, silently thanking him for stepping in, for acting when others had hesitated, and for showing that courage could appear quietly, steadily, and powerfully in the face of injustice. And on the open plains, with the sun high and the wind soft against their faces, the woman and her family stood together, free once more, reminded that endurance, courage, and hope could triumph even in the harshest of circumstances. The plains were quiet now, but the echoes of what had just happened still lingered in the air. The wagon that had carried the Apache woman was empty, its wheels still resting in the dust, and the attackers had retreated, their arrogance replaced by confusion and fear. The sun hung high in the sky, its warmth brushing across the plains, and the wind carried a soft, calming rhythm that seemed to soothe the tension of the morning. The woman, finally free from the chains that had bound her, sank to her knees for a moment, letting the weight of relief settle over her. Her body ached from the dragging, her skin bruised and scraped, but her spirit was lighter than it had been for hours. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the dry, warm air of the plains, and felt a small yet profound sense of freedom returning to her soul. She looked at her children, who were huddled close to her, eyes wide with both fear and wonder, and reached for their hands. The children, still trembling from the fear and excitement of what they had witnessed, clung to her tightly. Their small faces were streaked with dust and tears, but there was relief in their expressions now, a quiet awe at the power of courage they had seen that day. The woman whispered to them, her voice soft but steady. "It is over now. We are safe. We are together." She wanted them to feel the comfort of safety, even if only for a brief moment, and to understand that courage and endurance had carried them through. The quiet rancher stood a short distance away, watching the scene unfold. He did not need to speak. His presence had already said enough. Yet when he finally approached, he offered a hand to help the woman stand fully upright. She took it with a faint smile of gratitude, nodding to him as a silent acknowledgment of the bravery and strength he had shown. Without the rancher, she might still have been chained, dragged across the plains and facing dangers she could not have overcome alone. The townspeople who had been watching from afar now emerged from their hiding spots, their faces a mixture of admiration and awe. Many whispered among themselves, commenting on the bravery of the rancher and on the endurance and courage of the Apache woman who had endured so much. Some had been too afraid to act before, but witnessing the quiet yet firm intervention gave them hope that courage, even in small doses, could make a difference. Slowly they moved closer, offering blankets, water, and words of comfort. The woman accepted these gestures with quiet dignity. She allowed herself to be helped and supported, but she maintained a strong, calm presence. The experience had been painful, humiliating, and exhausting, yet it had also revealed something essential: the power of patience, resilience, and courage in the face of cruelty. Every step she had taken while chained had been an act of endurance, and now, standing free, she felt the significance of each moment she had survived. The rancher remained nearby, his calm presence a steady anchor amid the relief and chatter of the crowd. He did not seek recognition or praise. His bravery had not been loud or dramatic, but it had been effective, and that was enough. He guided the woman and her children toward a safer area on the plains, a small grove of trees that offered shade and protection from the midday sun. There the family could rest, recover, and regain their strength without fear of immediate danger. As the woman tended to her children, checking for scrapes and bruises, she reflected on the events that had unfolded. Her thoughts drifted to the moment when the chains had first dug into her arms, when she had been dragged across the harsh earth, and when she had felt the hopelessness of the situation pressing against her chest. Yet in that moment of despair, she had not given up. She had held on to hope, drawing strength from memories of her family, her people, and the stories of resilience she had learned since childhood. The rancher's intervention had been the turning point. His quiet courage, his refusal to yield to fear, had shifted the balance. He had reminded everyone watching that true bravery is not always loud or violent. Sometimes it is calm, deliberate, and measured, and sometimes it arrives just when it is needed most. The woman realized that courage and endurance could inspire not just one life, but many, leaving a ripple of hope in its wake. The townspeople began to approach more openly, offering small acts of kindness. A woman brought a jug of water while another offered fresh cloth to wipe the dust and sweat from the woman and her children. The Apache woman accepted these gifts graciously, nodding to each person with quiet acknowledgement. She could sense a change in the atmosphere of the town. Fear and passivity were giving way to hope and recognition that standing for justice, even quietly, could protect those in need. The children, though still shaken, began to relax as they felt the safety of the grove and the steady presence of the rancher. They explored the area cautiously, their small hands brushing against the soft grass, their eyes wide with wonder at the sunlight filtering through the trees. The woman watched them carefully, her heart swelling with pride at their resilience. They had endured fear, pain, and uncertainty, and now they were learning the first lessons of courage through observation, guided by both their mother and the rancher who had intervened. The rancher spoke quietly to the woman, offering practical advice on staying safe while traveling across the plains. "You have endured a great trial," he said softly, "but the plains are wide, and danger can still be near. Keep together, watch for signs, and trust your instincts." His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of experience and wisdom, a reminder that survival is not just about strength, but about awareness and caution. The woman listened intently, grateful for his guidance. She realized that while the immediate danger had passed, her family's safety would always depend on vigilance, patience, and resilience. She nodded to him, a silent understanding passing between them. Though their paths might soon diverge, she would carry the lesson of his quiet courage with her forever. As the afternoon sun moved slowly across the sky, the woman reflected on the events that had unfolded. She thought about the men who had chained her, about the cruelty and arrogance they had displayed, and about the fear that had gripped her and her children. But she also thought about the rancher, about the townspeople who had watched and learned, and about the resilience that had carried her through the ordeal. She realized that courage, kindness, and patience could change the outcome of even the darkest moments. The woman and her family rested under the shade of the trees, allowing their bodies to recover from the dragging, the heat, and the exhaustion of the morning. The children began to speak softly to each other, sharing small smiles and laughter as the tension slowly eased. The woman smiled as well, a quiet, knowing smile that spoke of endurance, survival, and the strength of the human spirit. The rancher remained nearby until he was certain that they were fully safe. Then, without fanfare, he began to walk back toward the town, his calm demeanor unchanged. He had done what needed to be done, and there was no need for recognition or reward. His courage had spoken for itself, leaving a lasting impact on the woman, her children, and everyone who had witnessed the events of the morning. The woman watched him go, feeling a deep gratitude and respect. She had learned an important lesson, that courage does not always need to roar, that patience and calm authority can sometimes achieve more than anger or force, and that endurance, even in the face of pain and fear, is a powerful weapon. She vowed to carry these lessons forward, teaching them to her children and sharing them with her people whenever the opportunity arose. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the plains, the woman and her children prepared to continue their journey. The dust had settled, the chains were gone, and the air was filled with a sense of calm and possibility. They walked together, hand in hand, with renewed strength and determination, knowing that even in a harsh world, courage, hope, and kindness could prevail. The townspeople who had observed the events carried the story forward in whispers and conversations. They spoke of the quiet rancher, of the Apache woman's endurance, and of the lesson that true courage could change outcomes without violence. Slowly, the memory of that day became a lesson in the town, a reminder that standing up for what is right, even quietly, could protect the vulnerable and inspire others to do the same. The woman's family continued on their path, strengthened by the knowledge that they had survived cruelty and injustice through patience, endurance, and the intervention of someone who acted with quiet bravery. She looked back once at the plains behind her, feeling a deep sense of closure and gratitude. Though the scars of the experience would remain, they were outweighed by the hope, courage, and humanity she had witnessed. And so, under the wide-open sky, the woman, her children, and the quiet rancher's legacy moved forward, a testament to the strength of the human spirit, the power of courage, and the enduring truth that even in the darkest moments, hope can arrive quietly, steadily, and change everything.